Over this video, we will be covering the two questions of what's the main objective of Shield and Healing Revamp, and what classes will this largely change? Is it going to be strict to the Shield Monkey, or spread into other classes like Engineer and Berserker?
Okay, the main objective of the Shield and Healing Revamp, I think that it all comes down to squad play in endgame boss fights. So, Hoper, you can tell me what you think about this, but when I think about endgame boss fights, they're a little bit one-dimensional. I've spoken with content developers who are wanting to create more content for the game, but they feel like they don't know how to balance bosses because you have to make them do a lot of DPS or they're not challenging. But then when you make them do all that DPS, the players have to bring super specialized tanky berserkers. And we just want to have a little bit more of a new dimension of challenge to boss fights. So it's not all about the DPS. Would you say that's about right,
Yes,
Hober?
I would say that definitely captures a large part of the issue. I would also say that there's another dimension, which is that it makes it very difficult to scale up rewards for players who are trying to be a tank or trying to be a healer, because in order for someone to successfully kind of like tank or heal content in the game as it is now, you kind of have to do a lot of HPS and you kind of have to be really tanky. So if we add something that's a little bit better than what you already have, the marginal difference, quite honestly, is it's not big enough from what I can tell to really feel like it's rewarding. So I would say that it definitely is that we want squad based content to be a lot more challenging without instantly killing off undergeared or weaker players, or just squads who aren't completely organized. But at the same time, we also need to do this so that rewards that we give to people who choose to play as a healer or choose to play as a tank, like feel like upgrades without completely trivializing older content.
I think that's a great point you make. And to give a little backstory on how the dev team got onto this project, we kind of came at it sideways at first because we were thinking about where all the combat classes are and how we feel like Shield Monkey doesn't have enough fun things to do. So that was one thing that was already on our mind before we even came up with this project. So on the flip side of it, we also feel like Berserker is super pigeonholed. If you want to be a squad-based Berserker, you have to pretty much make a really tanky setup that does a lot of aggro, but doesn't really do a lot of damage necessarily. So it felt like both classes were getting really super specialized. And so in each case individually, we had been brainstorming what we could do to give those classes more interesting things to do. And only much more recently, we've realized that it's kind of two sides of the same coin. And the real driver here is that squad-based content is really one-dimensional. So now that we've realized that, we kind of got our head around that, we're trying to focus in on how we can improve the make the squad-based content challenges a little bit more varied in what they prompt the players to do, as opposed to each one being like a classic tank and spank.
Berserker, because we are trying to move away from a system where one target has to consistently take damage for an extended period of time, minutes to potentially half an hour to an hour, if you look at how some people play. And so when it's no longer your job to act as the meat sponge of the team while everyone focuses heals into you, we have to start thinking about what can you do, what should you do, how should you do it, and make sure that the class theme is still preserved. And that's going to require some changes. And we're going to be very much open to suggestions from the player base once we get the nuts and bolts kind of settled. But for now, we don't have specific changes that we can share.
I would jump back in and kind of head off a really reasonable question I see a lot of people, which why don't we have more specifics if we are already embarking on this project? And I would say that this is just kind of a humility thing. We know what it is about the game that we want to improve, but we don't necessarily feel like we have the expertise to just like draft up the new system and go with it. It's something that we want to play around with because we are making some potentially making some big changes to how healing works. So I will say on the healing side of things, the one change that we are for sure going to go forward with is a change to how the self damage when healing is calculated. And the way we're going to change that code is to make it so that you can no longer heal for more than you take yourself as damage. So this will mean that every time you heal, it's less than 100% efficiency, as opposed to much greater than 100% in the case of shield monkeys. Consequently, it will no longer be advantageous for healers to heal each other to manufacture shields. So the reason this is absolutely like an essential part of the project is that right now, the way you all are managing to survive in these endgame boss rooms is by having a bunch of efficient healers healing each other. So think about B-size drones, think about any shield monkeys you might have along. That is creating a huge amount of shields for the squad, which is how the whole squad stays up. And of course, that's coupled with having a really tanky berserker soaking up the vast majority of the damage. So that state of affairs makes it so that, especially because B-size drones are so strong, shield monkeys are kind of irrelevant in many cases. And even in content where we really up the damage to the point that you need shield monkeys, it washes out any other kind of mitigation, such as regeneration of shields, because that's just a minuscule amount compared to the amount of shields that are being generated through this efficient healing. So what we know is that we want to change up the way healing efficiency works. And we're going to put that on test on a special branch that's not going to go live by mistake. We're going to put some new boss mechanics on test, and then we're just going to see how it is. And once we get a real feel for how those things play out, then we'll decide what additional changes we're going to need to come up with in order to bring things into a balance.